introduce yourself briefly? What you do in CPK?
My name is Buka Ngesa Omole. I'm the National Vice Chairperson and the National Organizing Secretary for the Communist Party of Kenya. And I also edit the party publication called Itikadi and Patanishi.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think the whole world's eyes have been on Kenya since these protests have been going on. Could you just give us a brief overview of why Kenyans are protesting?
The recent protests that have taken place for a few weeks in Kenya is unprecedented, but it has also to be understood in the context that Kenya has a history and a culture of resistance. So the current ongoing protests, that the bulk of the majority of the people in the streets are mainly young people, popularly known as the Gen Z generation. And what we must understand is that out of the 35% of unemployment rate in Kenya, 67% of those who are unemployed are youth. So there are two important issues that any responsible government, if they fail to address, then it is a time bomb. And one of them is the joblessness around the mainly the majority of the youth that have been going through the regular education.
Right.
But they have not been employed. This is important. And then the second question that touches across is the issue of land. So land is also an issue that remains unresolved. So we have to understand those protests in this context. The protests of last year were not as big as this, but the social explosion in the streets in Nairobi is a build-up from last year's Finance Bill 2023 that was passed into the Finance Act. The IMF imposed austerity measures, and particularly the cutting back on government expenditure, and instead of employing progressive taxation, expanding the tax bracket to actually tax the jobless people, to tax the majority of the working class and the poor people. This includes taxation based on basic commodities. We mean paraffin that is used in the poorest places, cooking gas. So this taxation has been going on from last year. But the spark of the moment for this protest was the IMF imposed bill 2024.
Right.
This IMF imposed bill again proposed a raft of other, taxes that were going to affect the poor people directly. So when the organized forces called for these demonstrations that started on the 25th, with mainly it started off in the informal settlement where people were resisting the government policy of demolishing houses to provide land for private sector. So the demonstrations are called Occupy because it started from Occupy the government and public, both private and public land for the landless people within Nairobi.
Right.
And then it went to Occupy Parliament, which is basically where the bill was tabled in Parliament. Remember the first round of the debates in Parliament, because the Kenyan legislators have to go through three readings in Parliament. So they have the first reading, the second reading, and the peak of the protest were actually on the third reading. And also thanks be to social media and live coverage of our parliamentary proceedings, because the demonstrators were outside parliament and they were agitated because they were angry that they had given the members of parliament a chance to set aside the bill and then start a new process, to put up a financial bill that was driven by the people. Unfortunately, when people are outside, there was a live stream and everybody could see that the bill has been voted into law. So that angered the people, and people stormed the parliament, and that's what happened. So the protest has to be understood within the context of neoliberal policies that are being imposed upon the Kenyan people by the big powers of the North and IMF and World Bank. They have to be understood within the context of police repression and extrajudicial killing that has taken place for the last 3.5 years that President William Samoei Ruto has been in power. And also it has to be understood within two crises that continue to face our country since independence: the landlessness and the majority of the unemployed youth.
Right. Right. So what are your major demands in these protests? Is it just the withdrawal of the IMF and the World Bank from Kenya, or are we demanding more here? Like, what is the CPK's demands?
The struggle in our correct analysis has been that Kenya is a neo-colonial entity.
Right.
That means that we cannot claim to be a sovereign country without economic independence. This economic independence has been denied upon the Kenyan people by the former colonizers and United States imperialism. This is important. So when we talk about, when we talk about the demands of the people want a true independence Kenya. They want that the decision for the Kenyans should be made by Kenyan people and not a few individuals that actually act as conveyor belts for international capital.
Right.
People understand that the IMF interference in our internal affairs has caused a lot of pain for the Kenyan people. Remember, this wave of protest can be seen also in history. If you look at the Kenyan historical background, you will realize that in the 1990s, there was another second wave that led to the introduction of the multi-party system, but it was also the crisis that was facing this country by the IMF, World Bank, conditionalities. At that time, what we call the SAPs, the special, adjustment programs. So the demand on the streets has been that we want a free and independent Kenya where the majority of the Kenyan people can make their decisions. But the current regime, which calls themselves in Kiswahili what Kenya Kwanza, or what they call Kenya First, has continued to surrender the sovereignty of the Kenyan people to the United States imperialism supported by our former colonizers, the British.
Right.
And there are certain elements that continue to annoy the Kenyan people. Remember, Kenyan people are crying that we want to complete our independence. We want a leader that can delink the Kenyan economy to just being an appendage of the countries of the metropole. This is the primary demand of the Kenyan people. Kenyan people want to live a life with dignity where the government of the day can be able to provide a proper framework and policies that can industrialize the country to take part into, its trajectory into an industrial economy. But the policies that have been imposed by the current cabals, which are the comprado class in our country, has continued to derail the takeoff of industrialization in our country. Remember, the same IMF forced our government to close processing industries and reduced our economy only to suppliers of raw materials to the countries of the global north. Remember, we produce tea, we produce coffee, but where do our tea and coffee find themselves to be processed and returned to us as finished product. It is the Finlays of British. So all our raw materials, including our natural resources, do not find their significance in the Kenyan economy, but are used to build the economies of the metropole. This is what is annoying the Kenyan people. Now, when the President William Samoei Ruto got into government, he was supported by overwhelming majority of the young people on the promise that when he takes the reins of power, he will turn the trajectory and implement a powerful bottom-up approach. But the President William Samoei Ruto has continued only to implement a trickle-down effect economy, where the rich people continue to hold the state power and manages the Kenyan economy only for the benefit of the few people and their foreign backers. So in less than 2.5 years, we have seen a president that is powerless, that has surrendered our sovereignty to the big powers. For example, in the Western Africa, the United States military bases are getting closed and their personnel are being sent home. Mm-hmm. On the contrary, in Kenya, in less than 2.5 years, the president has surrendered one of our military bases that has been upgraded and built to actually accommodate the forces that have been sent out of West Africa. And this does not come like, it does not come like an accident because it was planned. Remember our president was with Joe Biden a few months ago.
Right.
And Joe Biden declared Kenya as a non-NATO ally. This non-NATO ally was very significant in the sense that Kenya will get more money to accommodate United States military equipment from West Africa into our own country. So this continues to be the boiling point. He has surrendered an entire island, an entire, archipelago to actually Manda Island in Lamu has totally been surrendered to the United States forces. We have the Israel security and United States security systems infused into our security system. We still hold one of the biggest British military blocks here. That is the Batuk, which sits only a few kilometers from the Nairobi city. So the military personnel, British military personnel, and the United States military personnel combined have a lot of lethal force against our own military, and it's a big threat to our sovereignty. So it basically means that the policies that President Ruto has actually rolled out in the last 2.5 years are not policies that makes Kenya an independent state, but only makes Kenya, a client state of the dominance class, particularly in the United States and the Western countries. This is something that must be told out. Remember, the president signed certain deals, which was in the corporate media, BBC, Fox News, and CNN, and all that kind of corporate, propaganda factories.
Right.
Brought out a clear that president was providing employment through signing contracts to export the Kenyan labor abroad. So how can you be a president who is meant to be employing the majority of the Kenyan people and you keep on signing contracts with the Canadian government, with the German government, with the United States government to take the most needed labor in a third world country like us? For example, we have lost almost 20,000 trained nurses in the last 1 year. We have lost some 7,000 doctors in the last 1 year. Now we are losing engineers. The social sciences departments are under attack. The departments of philosophies have been hijacked by evangelical extremists, Catholic professors, and metaphysical nonsense. This is what is annoying the people here, that Kenya continues to act as a client state of the Western powers. Remember when Joe Biden was in when William Ruto visited Joe Biden, he acted like a child. He was being commanded in White House. He sat there just, like it was crazy for the Kenyan people to reduce our pride. And then now come the finance bill. So what the demands now is not just about the finance bill. The ruling class in Kenya has never given anything to us. In fact, anytime we have gotten anything from the ruling class, it has been a fight of life and death. So we didn't expect that President William Samoei Ruto will actually drop the finance bill without a fight. Remember, the President William Samoei Ruto dropped the finance bill after 49 comrades were martyred in the streets, mainly from the Communist Party of Kenya and other progressive organizations. 200 plus had been abducted and kidnapped by the special security forces. Now, yesterday, as I speak to you in this interview, almost 80 bodies that were stashed in sacks have been found in a quarry in our country. So it basically means that the fight that we are putting on in the streets that will continue, because we have a new round, the second round of protest, which will start again on Tuesday and Thursdays every week, is just to confirm our correct analysis that everything that we have gotten from the corrupt ruling class has been a product of the struggle from majority of the people in Kenya. So indeed, now we have made all the demands that can be made in terms of a reform attitude towards this kleptocratic government has been met. Remember, the president dropped the finance bill.
Yep.
We told him to dissolve the cabinet. He went on air and dissolved the cabinet. We have told him that the head of the police service has to be fired. Yesterday, 3 days ago, Inspector General of Police Omole resigned from the police service. All these things are tactics by the government to pacify the population and demobilize the militancy that is in the streets. The government has significantly put a lot of money to buy bloggers to try and demobilize the young people that were using TikTok and X to actually advance their communication.
Right.
The internet services in our country is in constant threat. Remember, we have to diverse ways of using shortcodes to coordinate certain strikes and bypass, police environment.
Do you feel like the pacification? Oh, sorry. But do you feel like the pacification attempts by him are working, or is the motivation still there in the protest movement?
You remember that you have to understand that the segments of the protesters in the streets had both unorganized and organized forces. And the people that even have more fire to be on the streets are the organized forces that have been in the streets for a long time fighting for a complete independence. So there's a lot of enthusiasm within the militant organizations that have continued to be in these streets for the last 10 years, demanding for certain, there's certain interest of the majority. But the demobilization exercise has also succeeded on the corporate environment, because remember this strike, that this general strike was not just a working class strike. For the first time, the businessmen supported it. For the first time, because of the heavy taxation that was imposed upon them. So remember, the middle forces are more likely to compromise with the state. So the businessmen, the people who are also helping to mobilize this kind of offensive were the celebrities. Remember, some of the celebrities had been taxed at 15% last 2023. This time, Ruto was proposing a digital tax of 35%. So it basically means that any person that you met in the street had a reason why they have been in the street. But the demobilization exercise have succeeded. For example, there has been celebrities in State House signing, negotiating with the president. There has been the middle forces in terms of the petty bourgeoisie, mainly businessmen, and that want to take advantage of this. The opposition, for example, the main opposition party being led by Raila Amolo Odinga, that was actually pretending to be a protagonist by the president, has exposed himself as a class ally because he sees that the protest in the street is a threat to his very class. So the ruling class in this country are joined together. But with yesterday's 80 dead bodies found that were dumped in a quarry in Nairobi, and several other, objective conditions that are prevailing in terms of unemployment in our country, the people's anger is even on higher alert than the 2025 social explosion in the streets. So we expect more Kenyans to turn out on Tuesday and Thursday next week. And we are saying it is a day to finish the job. We want the entire government to not just resign, because our demand is just not the president to resign. Because remember, the Kenyan constitution states clearly, when the president resigns, then his deputy will take up, or the Speaker of the National Assembly. All this Speaker, President, National Assembly comes from the Comprado class and the Kenya Kwanza regime. So we are saying that the people that have been stealing money, the people that have overseen the murder of the innocent Kenyans in the streets, they must not just resign. These people must be rounded up. They must be locked up. Their wealth has to be confiscated. And we want to have a new revolutionary government to implement a pro-people agenda. This is the very minimum program that we have rolled out in our units for the next round of offensive against this corrupt government.
Okay, so we've seen a number of governments have their own revolutions recently, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger. How do you feel Kenya fits into these decolonial movements we're seeing sweep Africa right now?
First of all the progressive and revolutionary forces in Kenya supports what was happening in the Sahel region, Mali, Burkina Faso. We support that to the hilt. Because remember, the United States establishment and their Western allies tried to discredit this government as military coups.
Right.
But in our own analysis, coups are not just coups. They are coups that are popular, that are supported by the majority of the people against a ruling minority that are anti-people, like what we have seen in the Sahel region. So we support those coups to the hilt, and we say that they are a pro-people coup. They are progressing the development of humanity in those places, and it has been a big inspiration for the majority of the people, especially here in East Africa. Remember, you saw some floods in the streets in support of the Sahel, what we call the Sahel offensive against French imperialism. So we had certain people in the which were carrying the Sahel flags to say, we do not want just the British multinationals or the United States multinationals to dominate our economy. This is important. So it's a big inspiration for the majority of us that continue to resist this corrupt government here today. And secondly, the neo-colonial discussion is at its peak in the African continent. Remember, South Africa, that has been leading this offensive, it's going down after the progressive forces, the supposed progressive forces, actually went into a coalition with the party of the apartheid. So there are other offshoots of progressive that are defending the complete independence and to defeat the neo-colonial projects. So this is something that we see that it will spread in the entire Africa. Remember, after our protest our Nigerian brothers and sisters announced that they are going to go on the streets to also demonstrate. Uganda, our neighboring country, have also put up a calendar to go on the streets. So we hope and we think that we can show firmness and solidarity with the rest of the continent that will want to free themselves from neocolonialism.
Okay. Where do you see Kenya's role in greater powers like America, Russia, Israel? Like as these powers fight to divide up the world, where do you see Kenya's role in this? The new multipolar world is coming up.
First of all, our understanding of multipolar world, it is a progress in the right direction, but it's not an end in itself. Multipolarity based on capitalism, multipolarity based on neoliberalism can give the revolutionary forces and the progressive forces a breather to actually consolidate, their backyard in preparation for the next offensive.
Right.
But remember our role as revolutionaries when it comes to the fight among imperialist countries. Our duty is to try as much as possible to prevent an outbreak of an imperialist war that mainly consumes the working class, and the rich people are never in the war front to fight for these wars. That is our first immediate task, to make sure that we can put up a strong fight to defend the anti-war movement. But in the event that the imperialist countries would like to go to war and that they're determined to do it like they did in First World War and the Second World War, then it is our duty again to turn the war into a civil war and prepare it into a way that it favors the people's camp and direct the anger of the people against the enemy. So we see that Kenya, and remember, this is not something recent. Since independence, Kenya has been able to only have a clear foreign policy of wait and see and what we can get. Remember, Kenya is only one country that never supported any liberation movement in Africa. The Kenyan government was always with the ruling class. They didn't support the apartheid South Africa. They didn't support South Africans against the apartheid Africa. They even threatened to declare war with Julius Nyerere, who was trying to implement a socialist project in them. When Israel was attacking Uganda, the Kenya opened the airspace for Zionist forces to act as a fueling station to bomb Uganda at that time. In terms of our relationship with the United States of America and our former colonizer, the British, the Kenyan ruling class has been very cozy in terms of advancing the interest of the dominant class in the West. So the only thing that has saved the Kenyan people is their spirit of resistance. Remember, after the 1963 independence, which was really a sham negotiated independence, it led to all the people that were militant were either hanged, including Field Marshal Dedan Kimathi, who was leading the Land Defense Force, and then a reactionary narrow nationalist class was allowed to take political power to give life to the British. This is important for us to understand that nothing that we have been given in Kenya we have been given on a silver platter. It has been a fight against the ruling class. So the Kenyan ruling class, remember, Kenya is the belly of imperialism in East Africa. We host the United Nations. We host the biggest CIA headquarters. We host the biggest Mossad offices here. Formerly the Scotland Yard, now the British intelligence are with us here. So Kenya, the Kenyan ruling class has done a lot of disservice to the Kenyan people. And many Kenyan people have also lost their life in fight for this democratic and civic space that we still continue to enjoy today, but it's consistently under threat.
Okay. How can people abroad help Kenya right now? So people in America, Europe, just outside of the region. Basically, like what's the best way we can help you guys get informed, things like that, just help your guys' struggle.
Now, it's important that for progressive podcasts like the one I am on, first of all, is to let the message known outside, because remember, we are dealing with an establishment that has many propaganda outlets to try and determine narratives. So it's important that we continue to get the message out there and to carry out our propaganda to defeat their propaganda and advance the not just our national interest, but the wider interest of all the oppressed people in the world. This is important. There is a bigger role in terms of international solidarity that helps to advance our struggle from one level to the other. So what I would say that the Kenyan comrades here, the Kenyan working class, need solidarity. They need the spirit of internationalism. And the best internationalism that the the comrades or the progressives at the imperial core can give to us, first of all, is to expand their offensive against the governments at home, so that they may not have, they should be busy at home and leaving us here to consolidate our bases. And also there are certain, based on their material condition, there are certain privileges that the working class that in the imperial core can give any material support. For example, now we have 200 plus comrades that were incarcerated. We have the legal contest in the bourgeois courts that
Right.
they need to pay for. The government is trying to drain the progressive organization through high cash bails to make sure that the people are released. We have comrades that have multiplied the debts. So what we will say that from the global north, any material support that can be put forth to us, we will really appreciate. We will also like the message to get out, and we always wish you well in terms of in your organization against your primary enemy, which is the dominance class in the imperial core. And we hope that one day we can fight as we continue to do in the same trenches to defeat the imperialism, because for our own analysis, our primary enemy at the moment is the United States imperialism and its hegemonic tendencies across the globe.
Beautifully said. Are there some ways you would recommend donating to you? Is there a way to donate to, say, the CPK or any funds in Kenya?
Yes, we have a link. We have a paper link that I could share with you to put on the show. Or if you go to our website, the Communist Party of Kenya.org, we have a donation link that currently we are receiving some little donation to help us with our work here.
Nice.
So I could share with you our social media pages to see live updates from the struggle front, and you can share it on the podcast and people can interact with those handles.
Yeah, I'd appreciate it.
We have also published some books about building of the Communist Party of Kenya. We have some mechanized shop that comrades can also get one of the items from our mechanized shop, and that will help us to advance our struggle here locally.
Nice. And then we're running out of time, but if you could just briefly say, what is the average consciousness of Kenyans right now? Are they open to socialism, communism, or is it sort of like a more nationalist mood right now?
I think the movement that is taking place now, in our correct analysis, is a patriotic movement that has forces that they're not necessarily friendly to socialism, though majority of the working class and the poor people in our country are quite aware of. Remember, the communist movement has a long history. The first underground communist party was in 1980s. So we have a long history of trade union movement. Remember, one of the biggest revolutionary under trade unions, trade unionist of the Indian origin was Makan Singh. And Makan Singh was because majority of the labor that was imported to our country to work in the railway system were mainly our Asian brothers and sisters. So it's important to understand that this social explosion in the streets now has brought in a new consciousness. Remember, now people are talking about IMF and World Bank. People are talking about United States imperialism.
Right.
People are talking about militarization of Africa.
Right.
So, but the people who are not ready for a socialist or a communist government are actually our arch rivals. They are our enemies. And actually, we say that hate is mutual because we are a big threat to their positions of privileges, and they continue to slander and try to discredit our party. They try to finance factions of our party, to put intelligence in our party, and even to threaten our legal existence. So these are certain things that we have to understand. But at the moment, we think the consciousness of the majority of the masses are anti-imperialism and anti-capitalism in our own analysis, except the mainly certain stratas in the society that we threaten their positions of privileges.
Okay. And finally, do you just have any final parting words? Any last messages to the viewers?
What we say that I think we are living at the most interesting time. We would like to interconnect our struggles, not just in the continent, but also at the global level. Global level. The Communist Party of Kenya is establishing powerful fraternal relations with all revolutionaries and communist parties that are organizing anywhere in the world. Because it is only through this process that we can form the vanguard of the global working class in the coming days. So there is a lot of hope. That could be my parting shot.
Okay, beautifully said. Thank you so much, comrade, and good luck with your protests on Tuesday.
Okay, no problem. I'll share with you some links that you can use on the podcast on your WhatsApp.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
This episode of the Pokepreet Pod has been brought to you by our generous members on our Patreon. If you'd like to become one of them, go to patreon.com/thepokepreetpod. Thank you. What the fuck? Glory to Stalin. I barely... And a special shout out to our Marshal of the Soviet Union member, Matthias T. If you'd also like a shout out, please consider subscribing to our Patreon, where you can also get episodes up to a month early. Thank you.